Well, hello there, you wonderful and passionate alien nerds that I'm proud to say I share your fandom with. Thanks for stopping by once more, and I'm glad you did, because when I was finishing up with my last video on this highly anticipated and kind of divisive Alien Romulus film just a few days back, we were presented with yet another couple of movie stills to feast our eyes upon, and feast I certainly did. So why don't we dive straight into it? I'm sure by now most of you know the basics, such as the film is hitting cinemas on August the 16th. It stars Kaylee Spaney as Ripley 2.0 and is directed by Fede Alvarez, who, if he pulls this one off, then in my opinion should go down as one of the more reliable horror filmmakers of this generation. Whether he does succeed with Romulus and brings life back into this barely breathing franchise is currently up for debate and a highly discussed and overwhelmingly contentious hot topic right now, for which I hold great skepticism. I'm not a hater, I'm just a realist, and many of my fears stem from the fact that most Disney products seem to have far too many inclusive box ticking for my liking these days, taking priority over storytelling itself to the point where sometimes nothing makes sense anymore. Not only that, but Ridley Scott has remained a producer on this project, so how much interference and preconditions were put in place to get this film made is yet to be seen. On top of all this is the unparalleled pressure of making yet another Alien film that I'm sure would terrify any director, as pleasing the majority of such a passionate and hardcore fanbase such as us is a task for the best minds in the business only. Or, I don't know, maybe just some careful consideration and analysis as to what made the first two films so effective in the first place. Might be a good way to go, perhaps. So my point is, I do not have anything against Fede Alvarez, as I understand from what I've seen and heard that he has an encyclopedic knowledge of the alien universe and truly cares about it. I also have really enjoyed some of his previous work and appreciate his vision and talents. But enough of all that, let's pull apart this first image and see if we can make sense of anything important, shall we? There are some great things to analyse here, but sorry, I gotta start with a small negative, as the first thing that comes to mind initially is how lacklustre and anything but iconic the three cast members look here. It's not terrible, but it just looks a little more generic than I would prefer, and more like what we expect to see these days, which doesn't inspire much confidence in me, I have to say. It may be due to unfinished colour grading, as well as too much lighting perhaps, that may be subject to change with the final product. But if you compare this famous shot, which was merely a set photo, with what we have here, there is a distinct shift in standards. But just to continue with some light-hearted critiques, if I may, they all look too clean to match their environment for me. Where's all the sweat and dirt we became so accustomed to in the original films? In fact, the perspiration in Aliens in particular was such a prominent factor that it did wonders to elevate the audience's perception of their conditions during those intense action scenes, as well as all the suspenseful moments we observed our protagonists having to endure within the facility's enclosed spaces and uncomfortable temperatures. That's my only complaint here, as it just seemed more likely they were posing for a photo rather than it being an authentic and gritty movie still from an intensely suspenseful action scene in the film. Before I talk about the main highlight of this image, I have to point out the expended facehugger down here lying dead on the steps. This might give us a clearer indication of where we are in the timeline of the film, and also hints at the possibility of more than just a single fully grown xenomorph occupying the station. I have some thoughts on this that are purely speculation, and it all depends on which path the director has chosen to proceed with in terms of the alien's life cycle, its abilities, and acknowledging both the first two films' interpretation of how these creatures procreate. And just to add even more confusion to the matter is the very large amount of hive-like material attached to the ceiling of this narrow corridor. I can only assume that what we are witnessing is the familiar secreted resin, as one curious marine once said, although there are some major differences in the look and consistency of this partial amount we can see, in comparison to the design and architecture that was present in the tunnels under the cooling towers in Aliens. Those tunnels were more consistent with the shameless display of orifices that endlessly lined the walls, as well as the pipe-looking equivalent of what was maybe support beams to hold this resin together. Here in the image, however, it appears to be more like some form of heat damage to a thin metal surface than any kind of resemblance to a hive. There doesn't seem to be any kind of pattern to it all, just a mosaic of abstract parts all clumped together like some kind of car wreck. But if we assume this material is xenosecretion, then more importantly, which film has Fede Alvarez borrowed from more? Is it Aliens, where the hive wolves were produced from the secretion of drones in service to their queen in order to house and secure victims carrying precious embryos? Or are we travelling back to the traditional understanding, even if it was cut from the original film, that a single one of these creatures can both create a similar cocoon-like home and produce eggs independently of a queen? This was horrifically displayed in some of the discarded footage from the 1979 Alien, where we were privy to the fate of Brett and Dallas as we saw them both being slowly morphed into an egg, while only Dallas remained alive for what I can imagine would have been an excruciatingly painful process. How exactly the secreted resin would transform living matter into an egg is up for debate, but it definitely gives more credence to the newly introduced black goo that became prominent in Ridley's prequels. We saw the effects of that substance in action and how quickly the reaction process was just from contact. Therefore, it stands to reason that the resin as well as the alien itself would contain the same properties within its very DNA, I suppose. So unfortunately, the presence of this organic material here doesn't offer enough evidence to suggest a hive and its queen, but Romulus could easily go in either direction of the two possibilities I just mentioned at this stage. I can, however, almost guarantee there will be multiple xenomorphs, if nothing else, judging from all the facehuggers. It's nice to know that this species doesn't give two flying fucks as to where it makes its home, unempathetic and thick-skinned as always. Another object that stands out is the mobile containment unit placed on a bench in the background. At least I think it is anyway, judging by the handle on top. Something about it reminds me so much of the poster for Alien 3, which illustrated the embryo in a state of growth and all curled up in a cosy circle. You start to lose quality as we zoom in, but I think the sentiment of what happened on board this station is pretty much loud and clear by now. Insidious experiments all in the name of progress, according to Weyland-Yutani, and the inevitable outbreak and loss of control. I do wonder if all that was left from these experiments is initially what is being stored inside these specimen containers, or if there has been something lurking in the depths of Romulus Station all along, hibernating in anticipation for new bodies to arrive. Lastly, do you recognise this blue light that to my eyes almost looks like the scanning laser used by the salvage team in Aliens? I'm not saying it is, but it does appear to be aiming right at the potentially organic material on the ceiling, doesn't it? It has the same smoky effect in its path and is the strongest light source in the whole shot, even if we cannot see where and what it is coming from. So, if this is the case, we are starting more and more to see the amalgamation of technology from both these early films that were separated in the timeline by around 60 years. Very interesting and sufficiently nostalgic. Some might say conveniently nostalgic, but let's give it the benefit of the doubt for now. If there's something strange in your neighbouring planet's orbiting space station, who are you going to call? Well, the cast of Alien Romulus, apparently. I do like that the flamethrower here better resembles the more makeshift weapon used in Alien as opposed to the upgraded militarised version in Aliens. The only major difference is that this time around the user isn't going to run out of fuel anytime soon. That's assuming that these canisters expel ignitable liquid or gas rather than anything else. I've heard some wild speculations about what this weapon could be, and I have no reason to think it could be anything other than a flamethrower. That seems like the more grounded and logical answer to me. I have to say though, I like this image a lot more than the other, just in terms of being able to see at least one cast member with a bit more clarity. I thought they looked out of place in the previous image, but this photo has a much more natural appeal to it, and I'm sure when the movie plays it will be suitably darker and vastly more atmospheric without a doubt. I'm just going to end the video with another recent quote from Fede Alvarez explaining more about the inspiration from both Alien and Aliens and how Romulus became a fusion of both. He says the environments and the pace of it as well, it's more similar to Alien for quite a bit, and then gradually you won't even know, you feel like it's more Aliens. It's a natural progression and it happens effortlessly. Yeah, so it's a great quote. If some years ago, during the aftermath of Alien Covenant, someone had said to me that there was going to be another Alien film that was all about the alien, a purely violent horror that combined everything we loved about the first two films in one, then I would have been over the moon to hear that. That's exactly what we need, thank you, but it all depends on the pacing, you see, because if they have a slow and suspenseful start with a spooky build-up that gives us enough time to relate to the characters, much in the same vein as Alien, that's perfect for me because you won't scare us if we don't like the characters. But if it feels rushed and throws the pacing out of sync as we then transition into Aliens, then it could be a problem. He says in the quote that it will feel effortless and you won't even know it, but does he refer to the environment and technology as well as the level of authenticity within the action scenes, because one of those has a higher danger of going wrong and it won't be the set design. However, if they nail it and we like the protagonists and end up enjoying the ride whilst becoming immersed without having to suspend our disbelief too much, then the second half of the film could be a welcoming transition into some very thrilling action pieces. Fede has also been in constant communication with both Ridley and Cameron, who have said they are very fond of the finished product of Romulus. Make of that what you will, as I'm pretty sure it's a kind of requirement to say these things, and maybe the real reason could be that Romulus doesn't quite compare to the originals, so no egos were hurt, if you know what I mean. Anyway, that's all the updates for now. It's about time for the trailer soon, I hope, and I know there will be so much to cover when it finally drops. So all the best guys, thanks for listening, and please stay entertained. Take care.